The pre-dawn air in the Garden of Gethsemane hangs heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and coming rain. It is a biting, hollow cold that settles deep into the marrow. Before the first light touches the horizon, the garden is a place of shadows and sharp, jagged silence. A massive stone slab seals the mouth of the tomb, its edges reinforced with thick, hardened wax. Two figures stand as sentinels before it. They are rigid, unmoving, their presence defined by the rhythmic, metallic clink of their gear. Every movement they make is calculated, a sharp contrast to the suffocating quiet of the grove. The guards stand firm, the sound of his boots crunching against the dry gravel, and they walk slowly. The tomb remains silent, a monolith of rock and shadow, holding its secret behind the seal. The air here does not move, it waits. Soldier One breaks the silence, his pacing boots grinding gravel into the dirt. He stops, spits, and gestures toward the city with a sharp flick of his chin. "The priests are paranoid," he mutters, his voice raspy from the night air. He paces again, his eyes scanning the dark tree line with a mix of boredom and irritation. "They have us standing guard over a pile of rock for 3 days straight. It is a waste of good steel." Soldier 2 does not move from his position against the tomb. He keeps his stare firmly anchored and his gaze fixed on the path. "They fear the followers," he replies, his tone flat and devoid of concern. "They think someone will come to claim the body." He lets out a short, dry laugh that dies quickly in the damp air. But no one is coming for a dead man. The followers are scattered, broken, and hiding in the dark corners of the city. They lack the nerve to show their faces here. He shifts his weight, the metal of his gear scraping against the stone. "Let the priests worry. We are here to keep the peace." The conversation dies as quickly as it began. Soldier 1 turns to resume his patrol, but he stops mid-step. The air has changed. It is no longer just cold. It has become dense, pressing against the skin like a physical weight. He reaches up to rub his neck, his brow furrowing, as he feels the fine hairs on his arms stand straight up. A low, rhythmic hum begins to vibrate through the soles of his boots, a soundless frequency that rattles the teeth. Soldier 2 pushes away from the stone, his hand falling from his hilt to his side as he stares into the darkness. The familiar sounds of the garden have vanished entirely. In their place is a ringing silence, so absolute it feels like a vacuum. The air itself seems to thicken, charged with a sharp, metallic tang that tastes like ozone. Every breath they take is shallow, labored. The soldiers stand frozen, their eyes wide. The pressure builds, a tightening coil of energy that makes the atmosphere hum. The ground beneath their feet does not just tremble, it heaves. A violent, sudden surge of force rips through the dry earth, knocking the soldiers off balance. They stumble, arms flailing, as the gravel shifts and fractures under the immense pressure. Before they can recover, the darkness is obliterated. A blinding, white light erupts from the mouth of the tomb. It is not a flicker, but a solid wall of radiance that cuts through the night like a blade. The light is absolute, searing, and impossible to look upon. It floods the garden, bleaching the color from the trees and turning the shadows into nothingness. The soldiers scream, but the sound is swallowed by the roar of the light itself. He collapses, his face a look of surprise, eyes wide with intensity. The air is no longer cold, it is electric, vibrating with a power that makes the very marrow in their bones ache. Every detail of the garden is washed away in this surge of divine energy. There is no space left for the dark. The light expands, pulsing with a rhythm that defies the natural world, shattering the stillness with a force that feels like the beginning of a new creation. The massive stone seal, carved from solid rock and anchored deep into the earth, begins to groan. It is not the sound of grinding stone, but of something far greater resisting an impossible pressure. The air around the tomb entrance warps, bending the light into jagged, distorted shapes. Then, the seal gives way. It does not roll. It is caught by an unseen colossal force and flung outward as if it were a mere pebble. The stone tears through the air, spinning with a deafening, high-pitched whistle before it slams into the ground yards away. The impact is catastrophic. The earth beneath the garden floor ripples like water, sending a shock wave that cracks the surrounding soil. Dust and debris explode upward, creating a thick, choking cloud that hangs in the air. The foundation of the tomb shudders. The massive rock settles into the dirt, half buried. Where the stone once stood, a gaping, dark mouth now stares out. The seal is gone. The soldiers are thrown forward by the sheer kinetic displacement of the tomb's seal. They hit the ground hard, limbs splayed, fingers digging into the dry, unforgiving earth. They try to push themselves upright, but their muscles refuse to obey. A profound, unnatural dread washes over them, freezing the blood in their veins. It is not merely fear, it is a total collapse of their human faculties. Their eyes remain fixed on the tomb, yet they cannot process the reality of what they see. The air itself feels heavy, pressing down on their chests like a physical weight, pinning them to the soil. One soldier tries to reach for his weapon, but his hand trembles violently, his grip slipping on the hilt until his fingers go slack. They are reduced to shivering, prone figures in the dirt, their breathing shallow and ragged. Every instinct screams at them to flee, but their legs are leaden. They are trapped in a state of absolute paralyzing awe, their faces pressed into the grit, unable to look away, unable to move. The world they knew, governed by order and steel, has vanished. In its place is a terrifying, holy void that strips them of their strength. A flicker of movement cuts through the lingering dust. High above the discarded stone, a figure takes shape, coalescing from the very light that shattered the darkness. He sits upon the heavy rock, his presence burning, with an intensity that makes the morning sun seem dim. His form is not of flesh, but of searing, brilliant flame, casting long, sharp shadows across the garden floor. The air around him ripples, vibrating with a low, constant hum that rattles the teeth of anyone nearby. He does not move, he simply exists, a beacon of absolute authority. In the center of the ruined tomb entrance, the silence of the garden deepens. Then, the figure speaks. "Do not be afraid," the voice commands, the words vibrating through the ground and into the bones of the earth. The angel leans forward. He is not here. He has risen. The declaration hangs in the air. Absolute and final. The finality of the voice snaps the spell. The soldiers gasp, a ragged sound that tears through the heavy air. They scramble, hands clawing at the gravel, boots slipping as they fight to find their footing. They do not look back. One soldier trips, his spear clattering against the stone. He struggles to retrieve it. He is able to grab hold of it firmly. They push off the ground, legs pumping with a frantic, uncoordinated energy. Their chests heave, air whistling through clenched teeth. They abandon the tomb, abandoning the post they were sworn to hold. They sprint toward the city gates, their movements jagged. Every shadow in the garden seems to reach for them. Every rustle of the wind sounds like a pursuit. They hit the main road. They do not run like men who have lost a battle. They run like men who have seen the end of the world. They vanish into the city, leaving the garden to the silence that follows the storm. The garden returns to a fragile, early morning stillness. The dust settles on the leaves, and the air cools once more. From the direction of the city, a figure emerges onto the winding path. Mary Magdalene walks, carrying a jar of myrrh, her shoulders hunched under the weight of the ceramic jar she carries with her. Close behind her, Mary, the mother of James and Salome, follow, their pace slow and measured. They do not speak. The only sound is the soft, rhythmic crunch of their sandals against the dry gravel, and the occasional rustle of their movements. Their heads are bowed low, eyes fixed on the dirt path rather than the horizon. Each woman carries the burden of the morning, their focus entirely narrowed to the duty of the burial. They move with a heavy, deliberate grace, their minds occupied by the finality of the previous days. They are unaware of the change in the atmosphere, unaware that the air still hums with a lingering, static charge. They walk past the trees, their breathing steady and shallow. The garden is quiet, offering no warning of what lies around the next bend. The path curves sharply around the final cluster of olive trees. Mary Magdalene takes the lead, her eyes lifting from the gravel as she rounds the bend. She stops. The movement is sudden, a violent halt that forces the other woman to stop abruptly and stare at her. The air in front of them is no longer still. The massive stone, once sealed with Roman wax, lies discarded in the dirt, pushed aside like a pebble. The tomb is no longer a closed vault. It is a gaping, dark mouth, exposed and hollow. The silence that follows is absolute. Mary Magdalene's hands tremble. The ceramic jar slips from her grip, hitting the hard, dry earth with a sharp, sickening crack. It shatters instantly. The precious myrrh spills out, a dark, fragrant pool soaking into the dust, mirroring the sudden fracture in their resolve. The scent of spice rises, thick and suffocating in the morning air. She does not move to clean it. She does not look down at the shards. Her eyes are locked on the black void of the entrance. The reality of the empty tomb hits her with the force of a physical blow. The threshold of the tomb feels like a boundary between two worlds. Mary Magdalene takes the first step, her sandals scraping against the stone floor. The other two stand at a distance, their breath hitching in the cold, stagnant air. Inside, the light from the garden barely reaches the back wall, casting long, distorted shadows. Mary Magdalene moves forward, her hands outstretched, searching for the familiar shape of the burial slab. Her fingers find the cold, flat surface of the stone. It is empty. There is no weight, no form, no presence. Mary Magdalene reaches out, her palm brushing against the center of the slab. She pulls back, her breath catching, as she realizes the stone is bare. Beside it, the linen cloths are not cast aside in a struggle. They are neatly folded. The head covering rests separately, tucked neatly where the head would have been. The women huddle together, watching from a distance, their eyes darting across the dim space. The silence here is different. It is not the silence of death, but of absence. They stand in the center of the vault, the reality of the empty space pressing in on them. Their confusion deepens, turning into a sharp, cold dread as they realize the tomb has been emptied, yet the evidence of a hurried theft is nowhere to be found. They stumble back out into the morning, the sudden brightness of the garden stinging their eyes. The sun is climbing, casting long, sharp shadows across the gravel paths. Mary Magdalene keeps her head bowed, her chest heaving with the weight of the impossible discovery. She turns toward the olive grove, her gaze sweeping the trees for any sign of movement. A figure stands near the edge of the path, partially obscured by the morning mist and the glare of the rising sun. He is still, watching the entrance of the tomb. Mary wipes her eyes, the salt stinging her skin, and moves toward him. She assumes the man is the gardener, the only one who would be working this early. She stops a few paces away, her shoulders shaking. "Sir," she whispers, her voice thick and ragged with tears. "If you have taken him, tell me where you have laid him." The man stands motionless, the morning light catching the edges of the olive leaves behind him. Mary keeps her gaze fixed on the ground, her knuckles white as she grips the fabric of her shawl. She waits for a denial, for a question, for any explanation of where the body has been moved. The silence stretches, heavy and absolute, pulling the tension tight until it feels like a physical weight against her chest. She prepares to speak again, to beg if she must, when the figure shifts. He takes a single, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them. The light seems to bend around him, illuminating the path. He looks directly at her, his eyes steady and clear. He does not offer a long explanation. He does not address the tomb or the missing body. He simply speaks one word: Mary. The sound is soft, yet it cuts through the air with the force of a thunderclap. It is not a question, it is a recognition. The name hits her like an impact, vibrating through her bones. The heavy, suffocating blanket of her sorrow tears open. She looks up, her eyes wide, the mask of her mourning falling away. The name hangs in the air, a bridge between the dead and the living. Mary does not think. She moves. Her knees strike the hard, dry earth with a dull thud, the impact forgotten in the sudden, frantic surge of her pulse. She lunges forward, her hands outstretched, fingers trembling as they reach for his feet. "Rabboni!" The cry tears from her throat, raw and unburdened, echoing off the stone walls of the garden. She grips the hem of his garment, her knuckles pressing against the ground, needing the tactile proof that he is solid. Her tears fall onto the dust, but they are no longer the heavy, stagnant drops of mourning. They are hot, fast, and driven by a wild, impossible hope. She looks up, her face wet, her eyes searching his features for any sign of the shadow of the cross. but finds only the steady, living warmth. The garden, once a place of cold stone and silence, now feels alive, charged with a frequency that makes the very air hum against her skin. He remains still as she kneels at his feet, his presence steadying the air around them. A faint smile touches his lips, not of triumph, but of deep, quiet peace that seems to settle over the garden. He does not pull away with force, but he shifts his weight, a subtle movement that signals the end of this private encounter. His hands reach down, not to hold her, but to guide her gaze upward. "Do not hold on to me," he says, his voice calm and resonant. He looks past the garden walls, toward the city where the others hide in fear. "Go," he commands, the word carrying the weight of a new, unfolding reality. "Tell my brothers that I ascend to my Father." The command acts like a sudden wind, clearing the haze of her disbelief. Mary releases her grip, her fingers sliding from the fabric. She stands, her legs steadying, the frantic energy of her joy beginning to focus. The peace in his expression remains, a silent promise. He turns slightly, the morning light framing him, as she prepares to leave. The garden path, once a route of slow, measured steps and heavy hearts, now disappears beneath her feet. Mary Magdalene walks quickly, her breath coming in sharp, rhythmic gasps that match the pounding of her pulse. Beside her, the other women do not look back at the gaping mouth of the tomb. They move with a sudden, frantic speed, their bodies leaning into the incline that leads away from the burial ground. The dust kicks up in small, swirling clouds behind their heels. There is no trace of the hesitation that defined their arrival. Their arms pump, their eyes are fixed on the distant city gates, and their focus has narrowed to a single, burning necessity. Every stride is a release, a physical shedding of the grief that had anchored them. Mary Magdalene passed the olive trees, the branches blurring into a streak of gray and green. The air rushes past her ears, cool and sharp, fueling the fire in her lungs. She reached the main road, her shoes striking the hard-packed soil with a relentless cadence. The city walls loom closer, replaced by a wild, holy joy. The temple gates groaned open, and the two soldiers stumbled into the inner courtyard. Their breathing was ragged, a sharp contrast to the rhythmic silence. They were a mess of disarray. Their gear was coated in thick gray dust, and a deep dent marred the surface of a breastplate. They stopped before the high priests, who stood in a row, their faces etched with practiced indifference that vanished the moment they saw the men. Soldier 1 tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his voice cracking as he stammered out the account of the tomb. He gestured wildly toward the city, his hands trembling. The priests did not interrupt. They exchanged sharp, panicked glances, the color draining from their faces as they realized the implications. The air grew heavy, the usual scent of incense replaced by the metallic tang of fear. One priest stepped forward, his composure fracturing. They had expected a report of a quiet night, not a total collapse of their authority. The silence between them was no longer one of command, but of a desperate, encroaching dread that threatened to shatter their influence. The lead priest did not wait for the soldiers to finish their frantic explanation. He reached into the folds of his robes and pulled out a heavy, leather pouch. The sound of metal clinking against metal cut through the tension in the courtyard, a sharp, rhythmic noise that demanded attention. He stepped forward, his eyes locked onto the soldiers, and thrust the weight of the silver into the hands of the lead guard. The pouch sagged, pulling the soldier's arm downward with its unexpected heft. The priest leaned in close, his voice a low, jagged hiss. "Say the disciples came while you slept," he commanded, his fingers digging into the soldier's shoulder. "Do not speak of the light. Do not speak of the angel. Tell them you were unconscious and that the body was stolen under the cover of darkness." The soldiers stood frozen, the silver heavy in their palms. The priest's gaze was cold, searching for any sign of hesitation. He gripped the soldier's wrist, forcing his fingers to close tight around the bribe. The soldiers nodded, their faces drained of color, their eyes darting toward the temple exits. They had been bought, and the truth was now a secret. The soldiers exited the temple gates, their pace hurried and their eyes fixed on the ground. They clutched the silver pouches against their sides, but the weight of the bribe did nothing to steady their hands. As they crossed the main thoroughfare, a strap on one soldier's pack snapped, spilling a few coins onto the stone. A merchant nearby reached down to help, his fingers brushing against the soldier's trembling hand. The soldier pulled away with a sharp gasp. The merchant stood, watching them retreat, then turned to a woman buying grain. He leaned in, whispering a fragment of what he had seen. The woman froze, her hand hovering over a basket of figs. She looked toward the garden district, then back at the merchant. The rumor moved faster than a runner. It jumped from the market stalls to the water wells, carried by the frantic energy of those who had heard the whispers. The priests had tried to bury the truth in silence, but the streets were already alive with it, the secret breaking free from the temple walls. Inside the upper room, the air was stagnant and thick with the scent of stale oil. Every window had been shuttered, and the heavy oak door was bolted from the inside with a thick iron bar. The disciples huddled in the center of the room, their backs pressed hard against the cold stone walls. Peter stood closest to the entrance, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the door frame, his eyes fixed on the sliver of light beneath the threshold. Every time a footfall echoed in the street below, the entire group flinched in unison. They did not speak. The silence was punctuated only by the ragged, uneven rhythm of their breathing. One man sat on the floor, his head bowed low, while another paced the length of the room, his boots making no sound on the woven mats. They were trapped by their own fear, convinced that the authorities were coming to finish what had started at the cross. The walls seemed to draw closer with every passing minute, pressing the group into a tighter, more desperate formation. Peter shifted his weight, his fingers digging deeper into the wood, his jaw set in a line of rigid, unyielding terror. The heavy silence of the room was suddenly broken by a subtle, rhythmic thrumming. It started in the floorboards, a low-frequency vibration that traveled up through the soles of the disciples' feet. Peter pulled his hand away from the door as if burned, his gaze snapping toward the center of the room. The air there began to ripple, the dust motes suspended in the dim light, caught in a sudden, swirling vortex. It was not a draft. The atmosphere thickened, growing heavy and charged with a static intensity that made the hair on their arms stand upright. The shadows against the walls seemed to stretch and recoil, pulled toward the center of the disturbance. Then, the light itself fractured. A soft, golden luminescence bled into the stale air, bending and warping until the space became a blinding focal point. Peter dropped to the floor, his hands and knees scraping against the stone, his mouth open in silence as he stares in shock. As the shimmering reached its peak, the air folded inward and then snapped back, leaving a figure standing in the void. Jesus stood among them, solid and undeniable, his presence filling every corner of the room. The transition was instantaneous, a complete erasure of the distance between the dead and the living. The disciples froze, their bodies locked in place. The disciples remained motionless, their faces in shock and disbelief, their bodies physically stuck in place. Every muscle in their bodies was coiled, ready to flee, yet their legs refused to move. The air, previously heavy with the static of the manifestation, suddenly grew still. Jesus turned his head slowly, his gaze sweeping across the room to meet each of them in turn. He raised his hands, palms open, and the movement was deliberate and calm. "Peace be with you," he said. The voice was familiar. The effect was immediate. The iron-tight grip of terror began to dissolve. Peter let out a sharp, ragged exhale. One by one, the disciples lowered their shoulders. The fear had evaporated, leaving behind a stunned, breathless silence that hung in the air. Peter was the first to move. He pushed away from the wall, his boots scraping softly against the floor. His eyes were locked on the face of his master, searching for any flicker of illusion or trickery. He took one step, then another, his movements hesitant and deliberate. The other disciples remained anchored in their places. Peter stopped only a few feet away. He could see the texture of the skin, the depth of the eyes, and the faint, lingering warmth. He reached out, his fingers trembling, hovering just inches from the man's arm before pulling back, overwhelmed. Peter let out a long, shuddering breath, his shoulders dropping as the last remnants of his doubt disintegrated. He looked up, meeting the steady, calm gaze of his master. The silence in the room became absolute, a vacuum waiting. "You are alive," he said, The words were not a question, but a declaration. It was the final anchor of their faith. Jesus did not pull away. He held Peter's gaze, then turned to encompass the entire room. The weight of the moment shifted from the past to the future. He spoke again, his voice steady and clear, cutting through the lingering shock. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. The words acted like a physical catalyst. The disciples, who had been huddled against the walls, began to stir. They stood up, their movements uncoordinated but purposeful. The defensive posture they had held for days dissolved. They looked at one another, then back at the center of the room, their expressions hardening with a new, shared resolve. A low, reverent murmur began to rise, starting with a single voice and spreading until it filled the small space. They were no longer a group of broken men. They were being forged into something else. The silence of the tomb was finally, irrevocably broken. The room held the weight of a turning point. For days, these walls had been a cage, a place to hide from the reach of the cross. Now, the perspective shifted. The cross was no longer the final word, but a bridge to this moment. They looked at the heavy wooden door, the same door they had bolted in terror, and saw it differently. It was no longer a barrier against the world, but a threshold they were destined to cross. The tomb, too, lost its meaning as a place of confinement. It had been a gateway, a passage through which the impossible had forced its way into the light. This was not a temporary reprieve. It was the foundation of a new reality. The disciples stood in the center of the room, their hands no longer shaking, their eyes clear. They understood that the end they had feared was merely the beginning of an unstoppable force. The air in the room felt thin, as if the walls were struggling to contain the scale. They were ready to leave the shadows behind, knowing that the grip of death had been broken, and the way forward was wide open. The heavy door swung open, and the disciples stepped out into the morning light. The sun climbed higher, casting long, sharp shadows across the courtyard. It was a different world than the one they had left behind. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and dry earth. One by one, more people emerged from the surrounding houses. They moved with a newfound urgency, their eyes scanning the courtyard until they found one another. The gathering grew, a steady stream of figures converging in the center of the open space. They stood in clusters, then merged into a single, growing body. The stone walls of the courtyard caught the first sounds of their movement, the shuffle of sandals, the rustle of fabric, the low hum of conversation. Then, the sound changed. It sharpened. A single voice rose, clear and steady, cutting through the morning stillness. It was joined by another, then another, until the collective weight of their voices began to resonate against the ancient stone. The sound climbed, gaining volume and intensity with every passing second. The courtyard became an acoustic chamber for their conviction. The sound hit the city walls and did not stop. It crested the stone barriers, rolling down the narrow streets like a sudden tide. Merchants stopped mid-transaction. Guards at the gates turned their heads, spears dipping in confusion. The chorus in the courtyard had become a singular, thunderous roar. "He is risen!" they shouted, the words striking the air with the force of a physical blow. The sound vibrated through the limestone, rattling the shutters of nearby homes. Passers-by froze, caught in the wake of a conviction that refused to be contained. "He is risen indeed!" The response came back, louder, sharper, echoing from the rooftops and the alleyways. The hesitation that had defined the city for 3 days vanished, burned away by the sheer velocity of the proclamation. There was no room for doubt. The collective voice of the followers surged, transforming the morning air into a medium for their testimony. It was an unstoppable tide. Every shout was a nail driven into the coffin of their old fear, leaving only the ringing, resonant echo of life. The echoes of the city eventually faded into the distance, leaving the Garden of Gethsemane in a profound, heavy stillness. The morning sun climbed to its zenith, bathing the landscape in a steady, golden light. All eyes eventually turned back to the source of the wonder, the tomb. The massive, circular stone lay discarded in the tall grass, half buried in the earth, where it had been flung. It remained a silent, immovable witness to the event that had reshaped history. The entrance to the tomb stood wide, a dark, gaping mouth that no longer held any secrets. Inside, the burial slab was empty. The linen cloths neatly folded, signifying a deliberate departure rather than a desperate flight. The air around the site felt different, stripped of the cold, oppressive weight of the grave. The stone had been rolled away, not to provide an exit for the Savior, but to serve as a permanent opening for the world to see the truth. Death had lost its grip, its power shattered and left behind in the dust. The garden breathed in the quiet, the trees swaying gently in the breeze.